Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Esther Mokwariola. In 2003, when Facebook was non-existent and owning a smartphone in Nigeria was still a big deal, a 23-year-old intern worked at the French embassy in Nigeria's capital city, Abuja, for 6 months. And following an incredible turn of events, the intern returned, but this time as the president of France, to meet with Nigeria's commander-in-chief, the governor of Africa's most populous city, and then unwind at the Africa Shrine like he used to do 15 years ago. And so we ask, what are your thoughts on the events that marked President Macron's visit to Nigeria? You can join the conversation and share your thoughts with us on Twitter at TVC News NG. We take your reports now, and Africa Today will continue. Welcome on board.
The banner of the French president, drums from the Lagos Standing Troop welcomed all guests into the African Shrine amid watertight security. No doubt President Macron's visit has sent confidence to other parts of the world about Africa, Nigeria, particularly Lagos State. He said he's here to build the future of Africa together with Africans.
African leaders are here to take care of their people. And none of us are here to leave the young generation to believe one thing, 1 second, that their future is outside Africa. They have to build their future here in Africa, and we have to help them.
For Governor Akinwumi Ambode, this historic visit will go a long way to break barriers between Nigeria and France, as well as foster greater collaboration for economic, social and cultural growth. Lagos Commissioner for Tourism told us what the visit means to the Nigerian economy, especially Lagos State.
It means that the world is doing more than just, noticing us. It means that the world can now deal with us on an artistic and cultural level without any hesitation. This is big business.
Culture at its best, arts without boundaries, were enjoyed by the audience. For Fela's children, this gathering has vindicated their father's struggle.
Fighting against injustice, corruption for 18 years in this building, keeping the legacy of my father alive, and then a super nation comes here to support this movement in the shrine. That's a huge statement.
Very happy to be here at the shrine. That's an iconic place to me, and I mean it was great to be here with Mr. Governor and to see Femi Kuti and all these places. I mean, we spent a very great moment.
Music is the weapon. Music is the thing of the future.
Welcome back. No doubt it was an emotional comeback for French President Emmanuel Macron when he jetted in from Mauritania to Nigeria after attending the 31st African Union Summit. Well, Macron went on to describe the Africa Shrine in Lagos as an iconic place of strength, music and culture, and also referred to Fela as a political icon who wanted to change the society for good. Well, joining me in the studio on Africa Today, I have Dr. Kayode Isuola of the Department of Political Science and Institute of the African and Diaspora Studies of the University of Lagos. And I also have Ifa Maberu, historian, lecturer, and a Pan-Africanist. Good to have you both on the program at this time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, let me begin with you now, Dr. Kayode. The Africa Shrine, symbolic, for the French president, for him to have visited this area in Lagos. But my question is, what does the Africa Shrine really represent to the continent of Africa?
If you look at the emergence of the current French president, what you see is a radical departure from the old conservative way of playing politics, not only in France, but also all over Europe.
Right.
And you will agree with me that for the summation of 27 years when Fela took on the Nigerian state, the Nigerian political elite, in what could be summarized as 27 years of no agreement, all Fela wanted was a radical change in how things were done in the Nigerian political society. So to me, the statement made by the president of France in visiting African Shrine, I want to believe that he came to visit African Shrine. Every other thing he came to do could have been done on television, on Twitter, on whatever. If he wanted to fight terrorism, statements could be made. But he came to visit the African Shrine to symbolize that he is an embodiment of change, and that it is high time that African people began to think about how to change their own society the way Fela would have if he had been allowed to do so.
And do you think we have such a person like we had in Fela?
Well, no, not today, not today. Not, in fact,
don't you think we can have someone budding in that line?
Well, I can only hope so, maybe faintly too, that someday we're going to have somebody like Fela that we had in the 70s, in the 80s. I mean, Fela was just not a human being. He was a spirit. And that is why it is difficult for anybody, be it his son or his cousin, or even those of us who claim to speak after him, it is difficult, if not impossible, for us to enter into his shoe. We're talking about somebody who committed class suicide. We're talking about somebody who looked at a sitting president and said, I challenge you, you are a criminal, you are vagabond in power. I'm talking about somebody who accused the Nigerian military, post-Civil War, trigger-happy, bloodthirsty military, of corruption, and called them names and challenged them to any length. Who does that today? All over Nigeria today, what you see are people who masquerade themselves as unionists, as activists of the people, only to buy cars and sit down within it and drive all around. We never had anybody like Fela. We have not had anybody like Fela. And I only hope that someday, faintly, we're going to have somebody like Fela, because we need a Fela or another Fela in this country for Nigeria to move forward.
Now, Ifeoma Beru, let's look at the value that the African Shrine possess to the African continent. Would you say that the values of this shrine has been permeated, or we know what exactly it represents?
Well, I would say to some extent, the African Shrine, as we have been able to see in most documentaries, and as we have been able to read in most literatures, represent an abode, the place where we as Africans, we tend to know things about us. We tend to understand our Africanness, and not just understand our Africanness, but also appreciate and live our Africanness. The African Shrine, the days of Fela stood as no more so for us to understand our importance as African people, politically, economically, and socioculturally, on the map of human geography. And when you look at all of these realities, you would see that even in contemporary times, the African Shrine, the new African Shrine, which is of course owned by Femi Anikulapo Kuti, still represents all of these positions. And this, which of course speaks for why you have a French president coming down to the shrine, of course, to speak about politics and of course to speak about culture. But let me also say that the intent and purposes behind the visit of President Macron is relevant also. We must also study beyond the fact that he came down to, watch some performances and also to sing praise the African culture. It is also essential for us to put what we understand as African culture within the right perspective. I think at this material point in time, it would be ignorant for us to speak about African culture within the context of what we wear, or within the context of the beads we wear, or what have you. I think we have got to draw our inspiration of the understanding of what we mean by African culture, or what we mean by culture, from the works of people like Frantz Fanon. He articulated what we should know about culture, and he called it national culture, national culture. It is not what you put on. What you put on is just things that we see. And I think it would be appropriate for us to place much importance on all of those things. when we speak about national culture, we're speaking about you controlling the entirety of your productive forces, you controlling the entirety of things that has to do with your production. So we ask the question, beyond the fact that the president is quite interested in African culture, is the president in any way interested in our national culture as a people? Because we have got to put all of these things, like I said earlier, within the right perspective. When you look at the still cultural, political and economic dominance, the French imperialism in a way still have over most Francophone West African countries. You begin to wonder if this is actually in any way visible or practical in any way, because you begin to look at the issues that brought the person of Ouattara into power in places like Cote d'Ivoire. Ouattara, of course, came into power, and Gbagbo, of course, was kicked out of power. And when you look at the issues that, of course, surrounded the kicking out of power of Gbagbo, you begin to wonder if, in actual fact, the French president then, and of course the country as it stands today, is in any way interested in the appreciation or the birth of the national culture in the continent.
Right, but let me quickly bring up this issue now, because you know African culture is part of what you just raised, and this is pertinent to our discussion. But would you say that the culture in Africa is fast fading away with the spate of modernization in our society today, because we have lots of changes in our African culture?
Absolutely. I think I consider the African continent as the dishwasher of globalization or global culture. We do not have our own national culture on the stage. We are operating under a very brutal international system that has no respect whatsoever for our culture. And it's not just the question of the international system not appreciating our culture. It's also the question of we also not appreciating our beingness, our Africanness, or our Africanity. So really, in actual fact, you know, the international system is antagonistic to our beingness, because clearly we ourselves, we've refused to appreciate who we are. We've refused to appreciate our Africanness. And when I use the word we, I'm also indicting those in power. I'm indicting the African leaders who have refused, you know, to spend or to research on who we are in order for us as a people to be appreciated globally and in the international stage. So the question of national culture, which brings us back to the question of national culture, we must understand what we mean by national culture. To be appreciated in the international system today implies that you must have something reasonable, possible, you bring it down to the table. But for us as African people, even when you come down to the African continent, you see that our young men, our young women are typical example of what you can get in Europe, a typical example of what you can get in America.
Right.
I'm speaking about the fact that we work our fingers to the bones to be like no other set of people, but of course the Europeans. We work our fingers to the bones to be like no other set of people, but of course the Americans. And we want to be appreciated in the international system. So I think it is essential for us to research on our national culture.
Yes, now we need to go on a very quick break, and we'll be back with more discussions as we've been looking at the events that marked the French president's visit to Nigeria. Stay with us here for more after this. Nigeria remains an important trading partner for France, where the country's oil production of about 2 million barrels per day represents more than 10% of the production of the French group Total. Perhaps it's one of the reasons why the president of France is highly interested in promoting culture, creating opportunities for young people, and tackling terrorism. So now, Dr. Kayode, the French president, not only did he visit the shrine, he also had an interactive session with us earlier today with the Tony Elumelu Foundation, and he said a lot pertaining to migration. He said this matter has to be dealt with because it affects not only Africa but also Europe. And he also raised issues on economy, helping to boost the economy in Nigeria and of course the African continent in general. But my question is, with his aim to help Africa succeed, according to what he said, and offer new hope to the African youth, what do you deduce from what he has for Africa, despite this belief of imperialism?
Well, my interpretation of what he means by culture goes beyond just how you dress. It goes beyond just the language you speak. It goes beyond the way you paint your face or you make your hair. I think the French president is talking about the global reasonable culture. And by that phrase, I mean culture that makes government accountable to its people.
Right.
By that phrase, I mean culture that makes a president know that it is criminal to pay workers 18,000 naira minimum wage and then continue to fly around the world in private jets. Culture, by that phrase, I mean that makes the ruling class know that they exist at the mercy of the people. Culture that makes the ruling class know that when people cry and yearn and aspire for certain things in the politics, this thing needs to be done. For me, that is the difference between the culture in France, where the president came from, and the culture in Nigeria. The world has gone global. It is no longer how you dress, and that is why you don't even see me appear in my agbada or fila this time around, because I believe only one culture stands around now, and the culture of people making sense of those who govern them, and those who govern the people listening to the people. So if I think there is anything that the president of Nigeria and the people of Nigeria need to learn from the visit of the French president and the emphasis on culture, it is because the global reasonable culture demands that governance is for the people and not for those who govern alone. That's my view.
Informer Berry, what's your position on this?
Well, I think also that, it takes us back to the question of national culture. You and I, we are living in a society where it has practically been difficult for us to consider ourselves as human beings. When you look at what is happening in our society, you come down to a realization that the appreciation, I think the most cheapest commodity right now is the African life. And I'm saying this because we have no value whatsoever, and I'm speaking about those in power. They have no value whatsoever for our lives. That's why on a daily basis, most of our people are being killed, and we aren't really practically doing anything reasonable or possible to get to abate this kind of situation. And I think that's where we have got to put in the question of how much our leaders, our so-called leaders, know of us or appreciate us as a people. And when you look at the entirety of what we understand, our people to be, I'm talking about the history of African people, you come down to a realization that you and I lived in a society where we had communalism as the basis upon which we related with one another. We are talking about a society where, had the understanding for one for all and all for one. You're talking about a society when an individual has failed to hit or is yet to hit, and the rest members of that society will ensure that that individual eats before they get something to hit likewise. But all of this understanding is not there anymore. You and I, we are living in a society that is rooted in the ideals of individualism. And I think that's where the understanding of we going back to who we are is essential. And I don't think that we need a French president, so due respect, to tell us what we have got to do, and I think what we must necessarily do as a people. Because much often than not, we don't appreciate many of these discussions when we are being told, when we discuss all of these things amongst ourselves. So we begin to appreciate it when an outsider is telling us. And I think that is hypocritical of us to give a listening ear to the French president, but not for us to consider these issues amongst ourselves. Right. And I think that's where we have got to understand that we as a people, we have a long way to go. And the long way to go implies that we must try as much as possible to hold our government accountable.
Right, indeed. Holding the government accountable has always been the issue of discussion. But let me come to you now, Dr. Eshola. From what he said, definitely it's not far from the truth, because this is what we get to talk about on a daily basis. Africans need good governance if we're to move ahead, to be among the Committee of Nations where things get to work perfectly. But in your own opinion, we know that this is not the first time we get to hear from leaders outside Nigeria that our government isn't doing what they ought to do in terms of provision of infrastructure and all that we need for a better living. What can we do now to erase the wrongs? Because we know we keep talking and talking and talking, but seems we get to see less of the action. What can we do to fast track what we so desire as a people?
I said that what the French president meant by culture is all about governance and people.
Right.
It's all about doing the right thing.
Right.
To me, he tried to use euphemism, and he was blunt at a point when he told the president of Nigeria that he was not here to solve Africans' problems for Africa.
Of course.
It is impossible for a foreign nation to come and solve the problems of a nation when it has to be with domestic issues. So for us in Africa, what you must take from the president's visit is that we are responsible to a very large extent, if not absolutely, to holding our government accountable.
And by holding government accountable, what are those practical steps we can
Very
do
good.
as a people?
I'm just about coming to
Right.
that, because I just created a background. I keep telling people all over the world today, what you hear people say is, go get your PVC, go and vote. And I tell people, this is like putting the cart before the horse. Nations that make political progress all over the world don't do so by voting.
So what do they
Absolutely no. You know what they do?
What?
The moment they get somebody to office, then they begin to hold 4 torchlights to ensure that that person does the right thing. And at the moment it goes away from doing the right thing, these people rise up and refuse to go until they put him to record. That's what you call resistant culture. That is what is lacking in Nigeria, and that is why Africa is lagging behind. We put people in office, and we have contract before they come to office. Politician A will come and say, this is what I want to do for you when you vote me in. And then we get in politician A. Politician A takes 360-degree departure from what he promised to do and begins to do the opposite. And all of us go to church. We begin to praise Jesus every Sunday. All of us go to mosque. We begin to praise Muhammad every Sunday. Nobody goes to the street to say, this must not stand. This is where the problem of Africa is. This is where the problem of Nigeria is. And this is what we need to learn from France, whose president came to us. And more importantly, the fella Nicolas Kokuti, who is globally celebrated today. Fella said, I no go gree, make my brother hungry, make I no talk. That statement says it all. If an average Nigerian today stands on that truth, that I will never accept it, I will kill myself and die for it, that injustice will go in this country, I will never take it. If only we begin to toe that line, that is when we are going to do honor to that fella Nicolas Kokuti that we are celebrating. That is when we are going to get the interpretation of French president's meaning of culture. And that is when Africa will move forward. I am saying, because fella himself said, democracy is demonstration of craze and crazy demonstration.
Of course.
He just played the background and said, people no go vote. Where do you get big numbers? Election is designed by the elite to manipulate the masses. They just print paper for you, you go and put your finger there, they drop in a box, and then they announce a winner for you, and then they go home and sleep. No, that's not democracy. We had democracy in Africa before the pink men brought democracy for us. And why did we have democracy? Because we had a culture of holding leaders accountable.
Right.
Whether they're in office or they're out of office, people must stand and say, this must not go on, and they must insist.
Right, point taken there.
Thank you.
Point taken. That's really an extensive analysis coming from your end. But if Beru, from what he's just said, clearly he has hit the nail on the head. But what can you take out? What can you, put out as a nutshell?
I think it is essential for us to also understand that the problem that seems to bedevil us as a people today goes beyond, what we can see from the abstract. We are talking about a systematic problem. And I think that's what Doctor has been able to articulate for us. We must understand that the current political and also economic system that we are currently immersed with, and in actual fact, imperialist and of course alien systems that clearly has nothing to do with us. You see, when you look at the entirety of our political system, you would see that in actual fact, we don't elect people into offices. What we do is that what happens is that people are being selected into offices, because in actual fact, to be an ordinary commissioner in this part of the world, you must necessarily have stolen some funds, because take a look at how politics itself has been monetized. You and I, we are living in a society where to emerge as a governor of whatever state you come from, you must have, of course, stolen some certain amount of money, because even to purchase the form that you need to use, to contest the election and not something else, it's beyond the reaches of poor people. So as such, you must have gotten involved in one shady deal or the other in order to be able to purchase all of these forms. We have done monetized politics. And why have we monetized politics? We have monetized politics because we are operating a backward, imperialistic and also vampire-like economic system, which we refer to as what? Capitalism.
So in a few sentences, Ifeoma Beru.
Is that?
In a few sentences to close the show.
So I think for all we must do as a people, and what we must necessarily do, and what I think we will do in the coming period, is to destroy this backward economic system, which we call capitalism, which is responsible for our backward state.
All right. Thank you very much, Ifeoma Beru, for your contribution on Africa Today. I'd like to also thank Dr. Kayode Suola. We appreciate your thoughts on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Africa in recent years have witnessed tipping points, with the turnaround generation at a forefront of subtle revolution, seeking to reawaken national consciousness and reshape ideologies by every means possible. Between Fela's legacy and Macron's visit lies a chance for Africa to see yesterday's message and today's reality as tools to create a greater tomorrow. Well, that is our package for today, but don't forget to join the conversation as usual on Twitter at TVC News NG, and also follow me for updates around Africa at Esther TVC News. On to the next one, I am Esther Omokwariola, and always remember, Africa can only get better.